Let's break down fire dampers, smoke dampers, and combination fire smoke dampers. We'll talk about what they are, how they work, and where they go. A fire damper is triggered by fire or heat, and it's meant to restrict the spread of fire, whereas a smoke damper is triggered by smoke and is supposed to restrict the spread of smoke. Now, a fire smoke damper can be triggered by either fire or smoke, and it needs to be rated for both heat and smoke restriction. So how do they work? All three of these are normally open dampers that close when they're triggered, but the mechanisms are a little bit different. So with a fire damper, it has a fusible link that is actually heat sensitive. And this link right here, which holds the damper open, will melt at a certain temperature. And when that melts, it releases the damper and this will spring shut. It does not have to be rated for smoke. It just needs to isolate fire. I'll also note fire dampers can be purely mechanical. It doesn't require any sensors or electronics to operate. It's just a link that melts and this thing springs shut. With that, fire dampers are less labor intensive and a cheaper piece of equipment. Smoke dampers are triggered by the detection of smoke, and as such, they require a smoke detector, which would be something like this, which is wired to an actuator. And upon detection of smoke, this actuator will activate and mechanically close these dampers. Smoke dampers need to be airtight. They need to be rated to isolate smoke, but they don't need to be fire rated. Now, fire smoke dampers need to be both fire rated and smoke rated, heat rated, and they need to be airtight. And like a smoke damper, fire smoke dampers require a sensor that can detect heat and smoke. And upon detection of either of them, it will trigger this motor, this actuator, to close the dampers. So where do these things get installed? These dampers get installed at openings in rated walls. And the type of damper that's installed corresponds to the rating of the wall. My first note here is that smoke only rating is actually pretty rare. Certain spaces in certain building types do require a smoke only partition, like in elevator lobby, but it's much more common that if there is a smoke partition, it's also fire rated. So in the vast majority of cases, you're deciding between a fire damper or a fire smoke damper. The first thing you want to do to determine where these dampers are needed are check the architectural plans. You can check the fire life safety plans and look for a legend like this, which is going to show you which walls are which rating. You'll see here where the architect identifies smoke barriers versus fire smoke barriers. And there are different hour ratings associated with each one. Then you'll want to look at the floor plans and actually identify where all these walls are. And I personally like to highlight those walls and color code them so they jump out at me and it's really easy to see where I'm going to need dampers if I have penetrations or openings. So let's say you've done that and you've identified your fire rated and your fire smoke rated walls. As you're designing your system, if you have duct that penetrates a fire rated wall, you're likely going to need a fire damper. It can also just be a return air opening or a transfer air opening. It's any opening in this rated wall, and it doesn't need to be a ducted penetration. It can be any opening because the whole purpose of this fire rated wall is to restrict any fire or heat from transferring, and any opening in this wall will compromise that function. So a transfer air opening or a return air opening is also going to need a fire damper. Now, if you penetrate a fire smoke barrier, then you're going to need a fire smoke damper. Fire smoke barriers are most commonly found in corridors, exit passageways, and shafts. And it's important to note that when you are selecting your fire smoke dampers or your fire dampers, you need to pay attention to what the wall rating is, and those dampers need to be rated to the same or better hour rating. So if this is a 1 hour fire barrier, then your fire damper needs to be rated to 1 hour or better. Whereas if this is a 3 hour fire smoke barrier, then your fire smoke damper needs to be rated for such. As a final note, it's very common that an engineer just designs fire smoke dampers everywhere because they meet the fire rating and the smoke rating, and you don't have to identify or think about which ratings are where. It's a little bit lazy, but it's easy and you know you're covered. The only downside to that is fire smoke dampers are more labor intensive and they do cost more than fire dampers. So if you have a lot of fire only barriers in your building, it is much more economical to actually pay attention to that and select fire dampers instead of fire smoke dampers everywhere.